part 2. Now, Miss Patricia and Junior have gotten up to leave, and now they're in St. Paul's. Mr. Watkins was so happy to hear that she had came back into town, and he was like, I want to do right by you. I'm sorry for leaving y'all. I'm happy that you, my daughter Tammy, and Junior are here. But his parents, they wasn't feeling it at all. They was like, oh, hell no. So on top of not accepting Tammy as their grandchild, which is their biological grandchild, they also did not accept Patricia or Junior. And then Mr. Watkins actually starts to become just like Harry, abusive towards the mother. Now, in this chapter, Junior talks about how every single man that his mother has ever been with has whipped her ass. And then he also goes into detail about years later, when he was 12 years old, on the news in St. Paul, Richard Watkins had ended up being killed because he was trying to break up a fight, apparently, allegedly, between his girlfriend and former girlfriend, and ended up getting stabbed. But they said that the story is a little bit hazy, but all they know is that he got stabbed and he died. But as soon as, but back to where he is as a kid, when they're with Mr. Watkins, 2 months into being with Mr. Watkins and him beating on her, Miss Patricia got her son and Tammy and got the hell up out of there. So they end up going back to Illinois, and Mr. Harry is like, oh my goodness, I'm happy that you returned. I'm a changed man. I don't beat women anymore. I don't get drunk crazy like that no more. Like, please come back. So Patricia, she's like, okay, we can work it out. So everything was going good until he started to get off of work again and get those little booze bottles after work. And Patricia liked to drink beer, and he used to like to drink the alcohol, and it would just turn into something completely different. They would 1 minute be playing with each other, laughing, and then it would turn into something different. For one example, they would say that the mother and Harry would be on the bed, and the mother would gently like push him, trying to play like a little love tap, but he would tap her back with a little bit more force. And so she would tap him again, and he would tap her again. But then the tapping started to become really aggressive until the mom had tapped him and he fell off the bed. Now, when Mr. Harry fell off the bed, he got back up and beat the shit out of her. And like always, she would just forgive him. Now, by the time Junior was in the 2nd grade, his mother had ended up getting married to Harry, which was crazy because he always thought that they were married. 2 years later, when he was 10 years old, he ended up having a sister named Elanda. But on top of now Patricia having 3 children, she was now married to a man who was a womanizer. He was always cheating on her and all this stuff like that. But then one day he decided to take a step further and was like, no, I'm not coming back home tonight. I'm going to come back the next day or whenever the hell I feel like it. So Patricia was like, nah, that's not what you about to do. Like, I'm your wife. Don't treat me like that. And he was like, yeah, woman, you my wife. Don't be coming in here talking to me like that. Like, I'm married to you now. Don't trip like that. What are you tripping for? We're married. And at that point, that's when Junior said he remembered Harry grabbing his mother's head and banging it against the wall. He said ever since then, his mother has been living with migraines, like basically suffering from them. And so Junior is older at this point now, so is jumping on Harry back like, nigga, don't be touching my mom. But he's still a little kid, and he's nothing compared to Harry. So he got knocked down on the floor, and he tried to call the police, and Harry comes and snatches the phone from out the wall, turns around and proceeds to beat her ass some more. Now, at this point, Richard Pryor is working on moving on and having a second wife. He's in New York City, and he has come a long way from doing appearances at the dinky little Greenwich Village Comedy Club to now making network television appearances like the Ed Sullivan Show. Now, during this time, Richard Pryor, he wasn't no joke. He was having steamy love affairs, remember, because he's still married to Patricia, his first wife. Now, among them, it was Maxine Silverman, which they had a baby, and her name was Elizabeth. Then he hooked up with this lady named Shelley Bonus. Now, Shelley Bonus is who he really wanted. He wanted to marry her. No games, none of that. But the only obstacle was that he was still married in Illinois. And Illinois back then, I guess, had like some law where you just couldn't get divorced, basically. That easy. You had to really show some proof. And so what he did was he had a cousin that worked at that hospital that Grandpa Fox worked at. That Francis Hospital. And he was like, yo, I need you to go to the medical records, look up when Tammy was born. And it's going to show that Tammy was born at a time that I was nowhere near around. I was out doing my own thing. So that is going to show that Tammy is not my daughter, even though she has my name. So it's going to show that she was having an affair, and that's definitely going to get me a divorce. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as he got that divorce, talking about baby, he ran to marry Shelley. Now, he had ended up bringing Shelley to meet Grandma Marie. And Grandma Marie was in love with Shelley. I mean, she said Shelley was so sweet and intelligent. I mean, she was a little bit Cocoa for Puffs, but you had to be messing with Richard Pryor because he was no easy basket to just be picking up and carrying around, So this is when Junior is saying that, he's kind of having a little bit of sunshine in his life because his dad had brought him a pair of cowboy boots that was just like his and some roller skates. And Shelley would like help him roller skate because she was an expert in roller skating, but he would always be like clumsy and fall, but she was just so patient with him. Pretty soon, Shelley and Richard Pryor end up having a daughter. Her name was Rain. And then Junior ended up meeting her when he was about 11 years old in Los Angeles. And they're still close to each other this day. Now, as time is going on, Junior is now, I guess, in grade school. And he's going less to Grandma Marie's whorehouse or brothels, but he's still going around there, and he's explaining basically how the brothels look. And this particular brothel was like a 3-story place, and it smelled, he basically described it as smelling like a fresh garden. It wasn't a stinky, smelly place. And he said that he would sit there when the women had downtime, and he would play card games and stuff like that with them. And when a new trick would come in, they would say, hang on a minute, Richie, I gotta go fuck. And that to him was just normal, basically. And so then he goes on to talk about his mom's dream. His mom had a dream to become a mortician. But she also at one point had worked in a hospital, and she was the person who took care of the dentures for, people who had dentures. And she thought it was like the most disgusting thing ever. And they wanted her to take it out, clean it, label it, and sterilize it. But it would be like she would get sick and like basically gag, and found it so disgusting that she would not label that stuff. She would just dip it in the sterile water and go on about her day. And it was like, no ma'am, this is a hospital. We ask you to do one of the most simplest things in here, and you can't do that? Yeah, you're fired. And so by the time Richard Pryor had made enough money to provide and do, more things for her and everybody else, he was like, yo, I can send you to mortician school. And she was like, hell nah. I'm damn near about to be like one of them dead in the damn coffin. Why would I want to go to mortician school? I'm good. But I thought that was like a nice gesture for him to reach back and say, I'll do this for you. Now, he goes in to talk about his little sister, Tammy. And Tammy was like a super light-skinned girl, so light that they used to call her the Pink Panther. But she also used to have like these faint spells, which means that she would just fall out for no reason. Most people who have that, you really want to be by somebody or be in a place that has cushion, because you will just fall out. And if you are outside, you will bust your head on the ground, hit your head on the pole. Like, it's very, very, very dangerous. And so Tammy would go to school and she had a mouth on her like Miss Pat did, Patricia. And people would want to beat her up all the time. And basically, Richard Pryor Jr. would be there to save her. And so one time she was talking so much stuff that this little girl had came back, and she came back with a bat. And when she swung to hit Tammy, Richard Pryor Jr. had basically put his arm up and broke his whole arm, basically trying to protect his little sister. And so he would say, by this time, the mother and Harry would get up in the morning, like early in the morning when it was still dark, and they will go ahead and take Tammy and him over across the street to like a neighbor's house. And to the neighbor, it was time for them to go to school, and the neighbor will wake them up and set them off to go to school. And he would say Tammy would get out earlier than him because she was like in pre-K or something. So when he was having lunch, that's when she would be getting out of school. So he would scuff down his food and then run and take her back to the neighbor's house and then go back to school. He said he was never able to finish his lunch, but he did that every single day. Then he goes on and say that they moved on up. They not eating just mashed potatoes anymore. The mom is starting to cook liver, which, by the way, I love liver and onions. Most people don't. And they did not. Tammy and him did not like the liver. And so the mother would be like very stern with them. Like, no, whatever I cook. Back in the day, it used to be like, whatever we cook, that's what you eat. If you don't want it, then you hungry. And he was like, it wasn't none of that gluten-free and lactose intolerant. Like, none of that, bro. You got what everybody else got. And so his sister and him would just like hide the liver under the mashed potatoes. So I shouldn't have said that she doesn't make mashed potatoes anymore. She was just making liver now instead of fried chicken with it. And they would hide it under the mashed potatoes, and they would still get in trouble. And then she started saying, like, you can't leave the table if you don't finish your food. But after a while, she realized, like, yo, they really not going to eat this. So whenever she would make liver, she would just make hot dogs for the kids. So now Junior is starting to learn bad words like pussy, dick, motherfucker, which he used to pronounce motherfucker. And it would just make everybody laugh. And still to this day, he says that he uses that because adults still laugh from him saying motherfucker. And he would still go to the whorehouses. And that's when his Uncle Dickie and all these other people would still work there. And pretty much, it seemed like more and more family members started to just jump on the bandwagon and work there. And they would make really good money because he talked about how Uncle Dickie was like 400 pounds and he had all the bitches. And in his home, he would have a whole bunch of whores that would live there, but they would only live there for like 2 or 3 months. They would come from out of town, make a little bit of money, and basically leave. Now, Grandma Marie also had a daughter named Aunt Maxine. And besides being one of the workers inside the whorehouse, she was also a bootlegger too. Now, with her being a bootlegger, she would have so many different crowds that would come there that it would get so busy that Junior would be out front making mud pies with the dirt out front, and people would come up not to go inside the whorehouse, but they wanted some of the bootleg alcohol that they would have there. And they would be like, hey, we're Maxine. And he'd be like, what you want? And they'd be like, I want Maxine. And he'd be like, well, she busy right now with somebody upstairs, so what you want? And they would say, well, I want such and such liquor, and he'd be like, all right, I'll be back. So when he was a little kid, he was already serving people bootlegging himself. And to him, this seemed very normal and healthy. And it was like, well, whatever doesn't destroy me makes me stronger, right? Now, something tragic is about to happen in the family. Well, it's been a whole bunch of shit that's tragic, but it's going to be a death in the family. Now, Grandpa Buck has a wife named Grandma Ann. She began as a professional whore inside of Grandma Marie's brothel whorehouse. But then she quickly made her way up to be a madame, and she was just a beautiful, beautiful knockout woman. But then she ended up getting cancer, oral cancer, and then quickly passed away. Richard Pryor ended up coming down for his stepmother's funeral. He stopped everything and came down. At this time, Junior was about 6 years old, and he didn't know that his father was famous, but he knew that his dad was kind of a big deal. Basically how everybody would act when Pryor would come into town, and they would get limos, and all these people would come around, and they wanted everything to just work out so smoothly. So now it's time for the funeral, and apparently the pastor or whoever was speaking was taking too long. So Grandpa Buck, remember that's Richard Pryor's actual father, he gets up and says, if this takes any longer, then that bitch can just bury herself. And this is a joke that Richard Pryor says all the time, and he uses it in his stand-up comedy all the time. And everybody in the funeral started laughing too. So imagine, you can tell what kind of family this is. Nothing really bothers them at all. So after everybody's at the repast and they're eating, they have fried chicken and baked ham, collard greens, mac and cheese, candy yams, and every dessert imaginable. Now at this time, the mother is like, yo, go over there and go talk to your father. But he's really nervous to talk to him because he's not used to his dad and don't know what to say. So he's kind of hiding under Grandma Marie's apron. And she boy, get the fuck on. Go over there to your dad. So he walks over there and he's just looking at Richard Pryor. And Richard Pryor turns around and gives him this shiny coin and then this fresh crisp dollar or whatever, $5, $1, whatever he gives him. And he gives him a big hug and picks up his son. Now, like I said, he's still a little boy, so he's ready for his nap. It's been a long day. People were crying, laughing, running around, all of that, right? So Grandma Marie goes ahead and puts him in a room where, like I told you, the whorehouses smelled like a garden. So it wasn't a dirty place. So he basically laid down somewhere where it was fresh, relaxing, nice pillows. Then all of a sudden, he has this uncle that comes in, but he names the uncle Fingers. Now, Uncle Fingers must have been frustrated or had grief or had too many shots of J&B to, I guess, mask his feelings from the funeral. Anyhow, Uncle Fingers comes in, gets undressed, and lays beside Junior in this bed. He gets completely naked, and then he starts running his hands and fingers all over Junior's private parts. And Junior's just laying there froze because he's embarrassed and he's ashamed and he's just too scared to say anything. But then at one point, Grandma Marie opens the door and saw what was going on and coughed. Uncle Fingers stopped and Grandma Marie closed the door and left. He said, that's all I have to say about that. Really? Now, after that has happened to that poor little boy, every weekend, he was about 7, 8, 9. years old, and they would have like these play dates and pageants and stuff like that every weekend, where all the cousins and aunties and stuff come over and, you know, just have a good time and drink and all this stuff like that. And they would have the little girls and Tammy and them dress up in these little pageant outfits that they would get from like a Goodwill and stuff like that. And they would decide who would be the pageant queen and all stuff like that. And then sometimes they would put on a show for the adults. It would be anything from like The Wizard of Oz and, you know, just little different stuff that they would watch, Cinderella and different things like that. And so after the kids will play, it will always be a kid's turn to go ask, hey, can we spend a night? Whatever, can we spend a night? Like, they always knew that the kids were going to ask who could spend a night. And it's like the parents already knew that that was going to happen. So they either had to answer yes or no on whether or not the kid was going to stay. Now, at this time, when the kids would stay, they would have sleepovers. And this when he started to get molested by his cousins that were a little bit older than him. And he kind of says like, yo, I don't really want to use the word molested, because what they did to me was a little bit more than molesting. Like, y'all straight up like abused, molested, the worst, right? And the reason why he said that was because one cousin would hold him down while the other cousin would basically fuck him in his ass. And to muffle his screams, they would press his head down into a pillow and they would switch off. And he said like the pain was just like hell. It was like the worst thing ever. And he was like, why didn't I tell my mom? And basically he said because he was embarrassed, and he also feared that the cousins would retaliate on him. And then he was scared that if he snitched, that it would end like all the plays and the pageants and stuff that they would have every week. And he just didn't want to be that little boy that everybody hated because he said something that was going on with him. He didn't know how everybody will react. Now Junior starts to talk about reflecting on like his childhood, his cousins, uncles, and aunts and stuff like that. And when he was a kid, if they had cousins that were like a grown-up or way older than everybody, they just called them Unc and Uncle. And so he had remembered a lot of the things that they used to do as cousins and play around and stuff like that. But he had this one cousin or these family members in Detroit, and one of the cousins had murdered their ex-wife and the boyfriend. What happened was the cousin had went to the mother's house and was like, hey, I want to see my kids. And she was like, no. And he shot her in the head in front of the kids and then shot the boyfriend. So basically, Junior had basically felt like in Detroit, they had no problem with anybody because their family was the motherfuckers who were going to come knocking at your door if you did something to them. So then he was known as the class clown. And he would do this because he wanted to fit in with all of the other kids. And he would just be like the teacher's worst nightmares. But he was always a good student. Now, what happened was one day he had to go to the bathroom, but the janitors had locked the bathroom doors at a certain time. So basically what he did was he ran all the way home, but on the way running home, he started having like little dribblings and drops of urine in his pants. So by the time he had already made it to the house, he had used the restroom on himself. And he was so embarrassed that he didn't want Harry to see him, so he tiptoed around to the back and went to go change his pants. But like I said, they really didn't have that much money. So the rule was that they had to wear their same school clothes 2 days in a row. Lucky for him, this was day number 1. So he just hung up his pants and then he went back to school and didn't say anything. So the next thing came and his mom was ironing out his pants, and then that whiff of pee sitting there overnight hit her in the face and she whooped his butt. And getting a whooping was like normal to him, he said. One day he wanted to act like one of the characters in a movie where they would hit somebody over the head in a bar with a glass and the glass would break. So he took a Pepsi bottle and he would hit Tammy over the head. And he did it once and she yelled and the mom was on the phone but really didn't stop. And he did it again like, no, Tammy, I assure you it's going to break. He said before he know it, when he bopped her in the head for that second time, his mother, Miss Pat, had that hairbrush in her hair and she whooped his butt. He said that was one of the worst whoopings of his life. He had bruises and webs on his body for days. Now, I know y'all remember Grandpa Fox. Now, before Grandpa Fox went to jail, he was a functional alcoholic, but after when he got out of prison, he didn't drink anymore. He just sat around watching his three favorite TV shows: Lawrence Walk, WELK, Hee Haw, and Gunsmoke. And whenever he would watch the television show, Richard Pryor Jr. would like run under him or sit on his lap, and his grandfather would like scratch his back. And still to this day, he loves getting his back scratched. Now, Granny and Grandpa Fox had slept in two different rooms because Granny had snored too loud. And one night, Granny had heard a big thump. So she ran in the room and Grandpa Fox had a stroke. She called the ambulance to come get him, but he had never recovered from that stroke. Now, April 7th, 1972, 3 days before Richard Pryor Jr.'s birthday, Grandpa Fox had died. Now, this was the first time that Jr. basically said that he had seen a dead body. Now, we do remember that he had went to a funeral when he was little, but he probably didn't walk around to see the casket or something like that. But this time he did. And he had this wooden horse that was like really special to him that Grandpa Fox had gave him. So when he went up to the coffin, he had put that in there, and then he had touched Grandpa Fox's hands, which he said was super cold and it really scared him. And he said he stood there looking at him for so long that he could have sworn that Grandpa Fox was breathing in there, but he wasn't. Now, since Grandpa Fox had died so close to his birthday, everybody came with presents and they sung happy birthday to him, and he had a candle with he had 10 candles on the cake, but he doesn't remember the wish that he made. But he does remember that it was so much love in the room when Grandpa Fox had died, and he can just remember that feeling, that it was like a celebration even though Grandpa Fox had died. Now, the summer when Grandpa Fox died was the first time that Junior had actually spent a nice chunk of time in the summer with his father, Richard Pryor. And he was so excited to be getting a flight to go to California and going to LAX. Patricia, his mom, had dropped him off there, and then a stewardess back in the day, like as a kid back in the day, you can ride the plane without a parent, and they would have a stewardess watch you until someone else got you from the gate where you landed. I used to do that all the time when I was a kid. Now, when he arrived at Richard Pryor's house in the Hollywood Hills, he said that it was a pain in the ass because, first of all, the place smelled like pee. They had to go up these flights of stairs after when you had got there and had parked the car. He said it was so horrible if you had luggage, groceries, any of that. But it was only Dad and his girlfriend. Her name was Patricia, too. She was like a pretty German woman. And so he said at that time his dad had booked to host like this show called Wolfman Jack's TV show. It was a midnight special. And a couple of days before the show, his dad had took him shopping and had bought him the same suit that he basically had. And so when his dad had went on to do another show or whatever like that, he had brought Richard Pryor Jr. with him. And the host had spotted out Jr. and was like, "Hey, how old are you?" Now, he knew he was 10, but his ass blurted out, "I'm 19. And so, like, everybody in the audience started busting out laughing, and they were like, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Now, by this time, the dad was, like, making more money, and so the dad had ended up moving into another Hollywood home, which was way better. It was beautiful. It smelled nice. It was beautiful furniture. It was a pool, all of that. But there were still, like, no kids around. And he said, like, he would wake up and he would basically have to fend for himself. Like, wake up and make granola and watch cartoons and stuff like that. So one day his dad had got up and was like, yo, we're going to go to one of my friend's house. And he has a kid around your age, so you will have some fun. When they arrived at the house, he could not believe who had opened up the door. It was Billy D. Williams. If y'all don't know about Billy D. Williams, back in the day, all the boys, little boys, grown men, everybody wanted to be like Billy D. He was like so freaking cool, right? So Billy D had a son named Corey. Corey was about 1 or 2 years older than Richard Pryor Jr., but it didn't matter because they had so much in common and they hit it right off the bat. And he said that when he seen Billy D. Williams, he was like such in a shock and he was like gasping for air. And Richard Pryor had looked at his son kind of crazy, like, nigga, what you tripping off of? Like, I'm famous too. But, he wasn't tripping that hard where he was lashing out or anything. So after when, Richard Pryor Jr. had got that new house, he started having more parties with more celebrities and kids coming over. And he said everything was good until his father had picked him up and threw him in the pool. And he was like, I can't fucking swim, bro. Like, what the fuck? So he was like, I'm damn near drowning. I'm like fighting for my life. But somehow I had made it to the edge of the pool. I got out and it was so many celebrities and everybody looking around. And he said when he got out the pool, the first thing that he said and yelled to his father was, you motherfucker. Now, if you have liked what you heard and you would like to hear more, please like, subscribe, and comment to have this page grow. Remember to come back and hop on the BlackBuster train.